Dr. Kita Park stared at the email on his screen. He read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The words remained the same. He had been chosen for the Mars Colonial Initiative. After 15 years of working on terraforming technology, his dream was becoming real. His hand shook as he picked up his phone to call his wife. "Hi, Jin." Before he could dial, another email notification appeared. This one was addressed to Dr. Hai-Jin Lee. Kita's heart beat faster as he read it. She had been selected too. Kita looked at the family photo on his desk. Their daughter Mireille smiled back at him, her high school graduation cap slightly crooked in the picture. How would she take the news? Moving to Mars wasn't like moving to another city. It was a one-way trip. The drive home felt longer than usual. Kita rehearsed different ways to tell his family, but none seemed right. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Hai-Jin's car already there. That was unusual. She normally worked late at her agricultural research lab. He found Hai-Jin sitting at the kitchen table, her own acceptance email open on her laptop. She looked up when he entered, her eyes bright with tears and excitement. "You got one too, didn't you?" she asked. Kita nodded. They had both applied 2 years ago, never truly expecting to be chosen. Now they had 3 months to decide if they would accept the biggest challenge of their lives. What about Mireille? Hai-Jin voiced the concern they both shared. Their daughter was 19 now, starting her first year of university. She was old enough to understand, but that didn't make it easier. They heard the front door open and Mireille's familiar, "I'm home." She walked into the kitchen and stopped, sensing the unusual atmosphere. "Why are you both home early?" she asked, looking from one parent to the other. Did something happen? Keita pulled out a chair for her. "We need to talk about something important." They explained everything. The selection, the mission, what it would mean for their family. Mireille listened quietly, her expression changing from surprise to understanding to worry. "How long would you be gone?" she finally asked. "It's not that kind of mission, sweetheart," Hai-Jin said gently. "If we go, we won't be coming back. Mars would become our new home." Mireille stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'd leave Earth forever. Leave me forever." "We haven't decided yet," Kita said quickly. "We wanted to talk to you first. This is a family decision." Mireille was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to the living room window and looked up at the evening sky, where Mars would be visible later that night. "All my life," she said slowly, "you've both talked about making other planets livable for humans. Dad, you've spent years working on terraforming systems. Mom, your whole career is about growing food in impossible places." She turned to face them. "If anyone should go to Mars, it's you two." "But what about you?" Hai-Jin asked. Mireille smiled, though her eyes were wet. "I'll be the first person to visit my parents on another planet. That's pretty cool, right?" Keita and Hai-Jin looked at each other, amazed by their daughter's strength. They had 3 months of intensive training ahead, followed by an 8-month journey through space. Everything would change. But in that moment, watching Mireille try to be brave for them, Kita knew they had already passed their first test as future Martian colonists. That night, the Park family sat in their backyard, watching Mars shine like a red jewel in the sky. Soon, it wouldn't just be a distant point of light. It would be home. Kita held his wife's hand and watched his daughter take pictures of the planet with her phone. The hardest part of reaching for the stars, he realized, was letting go of Earth. 4 months into their journey to Mars, Chief Engineer Han-Sol Kim floated through the spaceship's main corridor, checking systems on his tablet. Everything had gone smoothly so far, almost too smoothly. In his experience, that usually meant trouble was coming. The colony ship, named New Dawn, carried 120 people toward their new home. It was the biggest vessel humans had ever sent to Mars. Han-Sol often thought about how much responsibility rested on his shoulders. One small mistake could end everything. He reached the navigation room, where Jaiwon Kang sat monitoring their course. She looked up from her screens with a worried expression. "Hansol, you need to see this," she said, pointing to one of her displays. "The solar activity readings are rising fast." Hansol moved closer, his heart beating faster as he read the numbers. "How long until it hits us?" "Maybe 2 hours. It's a big one." Hansol pressed the intercom button. "Captain Choi to the navigation room, please. Emergency status." Captain Sang-ho Choi arrived quickly. After seeing the data, he called for an emergency meeting. Within minutes, the ship's senior staff gathered in the command center. "A large solar flare is heading our way," Jae-won explained to the group. "Our normal shields might not be enough to protect us." Dr. Kita Park spoke up. "What about the terraforming equipment? If the radiation damages it, we won't be able to process Mars' atmosphere when we arrive." Hansol had been thinking about this problem. "We could redirect power from non-essential systems to strengthen our shields, but we'd have to shut down artificial gravity in some sections." "How long would people have to go without gravity?" Dr. Hai Jin Lee asked, thinking about her greenhouse modules. "At least 12 hours, Hansol answered. "Maybe longer." Captain Choi made his decision quickly. "Do it. Better to float for a day than lose our essential equipment." The next hour was busy as they prepared the ship. People moved to secure sections, tying down loose items. In the greenhouse modules, Hai Jin and her team rushed to secure the young plants they had started growing. When the solar flare hit, the ship groaned under the strain. In sections without gravity, people floated nervously, holding onto handrails. Hansol stayed in the engineering room, watching power levels and shield strength. Then something went wrong. A power coupling failed, weakening a section of their shields. Red warning lights flashed across Hansol's screens. "G1," he called through the radio. "I need you to help me balance the shield grid. We're losing coverage in Section 7. Working together, Hansol and J1 rerouted power from other systems. Every minute felt like an hour as they fought to protect their ship. If the shields failed, the radiation would kill them all. Finally, after 3 tense hours, the solar storm passed. Hansol wiped sweat from his forehead as he checked the damage reports. They had lost some minor systems, but everything important was safe. In the following days, the crew grew closer as they shared stories about the experience. Dr. Kita found Hansol in the observation room one evening, looking out at the stars. "You saved us all," Kita said. Hansol shook his head. "We saved ourselves. One person couldn't have handled that crisis alone. We succeeded because we worked together." Kita nodded, understanding. If they could survive this, maybe they really could build a new home on Mars. But as he looked out at the vast darkness of space, he knew there would be more challenges ahead. The new dawn continued its journey through space, carrying humanity's hopes toward the red planet. They had passed their first major test, but Mars was still 4 months away. As Hansol returned to his regular equipment checks, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises space had in store for them. Captain Sang-ho Choi sat in the command chair of the landing vessel, watching the red planet grow larger in their viewport. After 8 months in space, Mars was no longer just a distant dream. But their hardest challenge lay ahead, landing safely on its surface. "Status report," he called out to his crew. "All systems ready," Hansol responded from the engineering station. "Landing gear is good. Fuel levels at 98%. Navigation systems working properly," Jae-won added, but her voice held a note of worry. "But Captain, these dust storms weren't in the forecast." Through the viewport, they could see massive clouds of red dust swirling across the Martian surface. Their planned landing zone was somewhere below those storms, but they couldn't see it. "How bad is the visibility?" Sang-ho asked. "Less than 100 meters, Jae-won replied. "The landing computers need at least 500 meters to work properly." In the passenger section, Kita and Hai Jin held hands tightly. Along with 30 other colonists, they waited to hear if they would need to delay the landing. delays could be dangerous. They had limited fuel for landing attempts. Back in the cockpit, Sang-ho studied the storm patterns on his screen. The dust storms covered most of their primary landing zone, but he noticed something interesting. Ji-won, what about that area? He pointed to a relatively clear spot on the map. Could we land there? Ji-won checked the coordinates. It's 50 kilometers from our planned base location. The ground is flat enough, but we have to cross a lot of rough terrain to reach the base site. Sang-ho faced a difficult choice. They could wait for the storms to clear, using precious fuel to stay in orbit, or they could land in the clear area and figure out how to reach their base location later. Captain, Han Sol called out. Fuel levels will drop to critical in 6 hours if we stay in orbit. Sang-ho made his decision. Ji-won, plot a course for the clear zone. Han Sol, prepare for manual landing. I'm taking control. The landing vessel broke through Mars' thin atmosphere, shaking violently. Red dust streaked past their windows. Warning alarms beeped as the heat shield temperature rose. Altitude 5,000 meters, Ji-won called out. Wind speed increasing. Sang-ho's hands gripped the controls tightly. He had practiced this thousands of times in simulators, but this was different. This was real. 2,000 meters. The landing thrusters fired, slowing their descent. Through breaks in the dust, they could see the Martian surface rushing up to meet them. 1,000 meters. 500 meters. 200 meters. Time seemed to slow down. Sang-ho could feel every slight movement of the controls, every adjustment in their descent. Then, with a gentle thud, they touched down. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. They had done it. They were on Mars. Han Sol checked his readings. Landing gear stable. Hull integrity good. We're safe, Captain. A cheer went up from the passenger section. Ki-tae and Hai-jin hugged each other, tears floating in their eyes. They had reached their new home. But their celebration was brief. Sang-ho gathered everyone for a meeting to discuss their situation. They had landed safely, but they were far from their intended location. They would need to cross 50 kilometers of unknown Martian terrain with their equipment and supplies. As Ki-tae looked out the window at the red landscape, he felt a mix of joy and worry. They had reached Mars, but in many ways, their journey was just beginning. Somewhere out there, across the dusty plains, was the spot where they would build humanity's first home on another planet. The real test of their courage and determination was about to begin. 2 weeks after landing, lead architect Yuna Shin stood in the weak Martian sunlight, studying the construction plans on her tablet. The colony's main buildings were supposed to be finished by now. Instead, they had barely started. The problem wasn't the workers or the equipment. The problem was Mars itself. Everything they had planned on Earth worked differently here. The extreme cold made materials brittle. The dust got into every joint and seal. Even the weaker gravity changed how structures held together. Yuna walked to where the first habitat dome was being built. The curved panels that worked perfectly in Earth simulations kept cracking in a harsh Martian environment. She watched as another panel split down the middle during installation. Stop, she called out to the construction team. We need to try something different. Inside the temporary shelter, Dr. Hai-jin Lee faced her own challenges. The first greenhouse system, which should have been producing food by now, was failing. The plants were dying despite following all their carefully made Earth plans. The soil composition is wrong, she explained to Ki-tae as they examined the withering plants. Something in the Martian dust is affecting the root systems. Ki-tae nodded, understanding her frustration. His own terraforming equipment was struggling with the planet's thin atmosphere. Nothing was working as they had expected. That evening, Captain Sang-ho called a meeting in the main shelter. Everyone was tired and worried. Their supplies would last 6 months, but they needed to have working systems before then. We can't keep following Earth designs, Yuna said, standing to address the group. We need to create new solutions for Mars. She showed them her new idea. Instead of building above ground, They could use natural Martian caves and craters, covering them with smaller, stronger domes. The natural formations would protect them from radiation and dust storms. "There's a good cave system near here," she explained. "We could build our colony inside it, using the rock as natural insulation." Hansel, the engineer, liked the idea. "We could seal the caves section by section. It would be easier than building everything from scratch." Hai-Jin spoke up next. "I've been studying the Martian soil that's killing our plants. If we treat it differently, maybe it could actually help them grow. The dust has minerals our plants could use." Keita added his thoughts about the terraforming equipment. "What if we stopped trying to force Earth-like conditions? We could adapt our systems to work with Mars's natural environment instead of fighting against it." As they talked, excitement began to replace their worry. They were learning an important lesson. Success on Mars meant changing their Earth-based thinking. Over the next few weeks, they put their new ideas into action. Yuna's team began converting the caves into living spaces. The natural formations protected them from the harsh Martian weather, and the smaller domes were much stronger than the original design. In her new underground greenhouse, Hai-Jin mixed Martian soil with special minerals. Slowly, the plants began to grow stronger than before. The unique conditions of Mars were becoming an advantage instead of a problem. Keita modified his terraforming systems to work with the planet's existing atmosphere rather than trying to completely change it. The equipment finally began working properly. 1 month later, Yuna stood in the entrance of their new cave colony. The first living spaces were ready, and more were under construction. They had named it New Eden, hoping it would become a true garden in the Martian desert. Looking at their progress, she realized something important. They weren't just building a colony anymore. They were learning to become true Martians. Geologist Min Seok Kwon carefully examined the rock samples from the latest drilling site. The colony needed to expand their water extraction system, and his job was to find the best location. He had been studying Mars' underground structures for 3 months now, but today something looked different. Under his microscope, the rock sample showed unusual patterns. At first, he thought it was a mistake in his equipment. He cleaned the lens and looked again. The patterns were still there. Min Seok's hands shook as he prepared the sample for more tests. He had seen formations like this before, but only in fossilized bacteria from Earth. Could it be possible? He called Dr. Keita Park to his laboratory. Keita arrived quickly, curious about the urgency in Min Seok's voice. "Look at this," Min Seok said, pointing to his microscope. "Tell me what you see." Keita looked through the lens. His eyes widened. "Are these what I think they are?" "I believe we just found evidence of ancient life on Mars," Min Seok said quietly. "These patterns match bacterial fossils found in Earth's oldest rocks." The news spread quickly through the colony. Captain Sang-ho called an emergency meeting. Everyone gathered in the main cave chamber, talking excitedly about the discovery. "We need to protect this site," Min Seok explained to the group. "There could be more evidence of ancient life down there. This could be the biggest scientific discovery in human history." But not everyone agreed. Yoon Ah-shin, the lead architect, stood up with concern on her face. The water extraction system was planned for that exact location. "Without it, we can't expand the colony as scheduled." "We can find another place for water extraction," Min Seok argued. "But if we destroy these fossils, we lose them forever." The colony divided into 2 groups. The scientists wanted to preserve the site for study. The engineers and builders argued that the colony's survival had to come first. Han Sol Kim studied the plans carefully. "The nearest alternative water source is 3 kilometers away. Running pipes that far would take months and use resources we don't have." Dr. Hai-Jin Lee suggested a compromise. "What if we study the site thoroughly first, then carefully move any important samples before continuing with construction?" Keita shook his head. "Moving the samples could damage them. We need to study them in their natural position to understand how life existed here." Captain Sang-ho listened to everyone's arguments. As colony leader, The final decision was his. They needed the water system for survival, but this discovery could change humanity's understanding of life in the universe. After much thought, he made his decision. We'll divide our resources. Half the team will work on finding an alternative water source. The other half will help Min Seok study the site. If we can't find another water source within 2 weeks, we'll have to use this location. The next days were busy as everyone worked together. Min Seok and his team carefully documented every aspect of the site. The engineering team searched for new water sources, drilling test holes in different locations. As Min Seok studied the ancient traces of life, he thought about how amazing it was. Humans had come to Mars looking for a new home, but instead, they found evidence that they weren't alone in the universe. The red planet had held this secret for millions of years, waiting for someone to find it. The discovery changed how everyone saw their mission. They weren't just building a colony anymore. They were uncovering the history of 2 planets, Earth and Mars. The warning alarms woke Han Sol Kim at 3 a.m. Mars time. The oxygen recycling system was failing. He rushed to the control room, still putting on his jacket. Captain Sang-ho and Dr. Kita Park were already there, looking at the emergency readings. The main oxygen processor is shutting down, Han Sol said, checking the system displays. Backup systems are not responding properly. The situation was serious. The colony's oxygen supply would last only 72 hours without the recycling system. After that, they would run out of breathable air. What caused this? Captain Sang-ho asked, his voice tight with concern. Han Sol pointed to the maintenance logs. The Martian dust is different from what we tested on Earth. It's damaging the filters faster than expected. The whole system is clogged. They tried everything they knew from their Earth training. They cleaned the filters, replaced damaged parts, and restarted the systems. Nothing worked. The machines kept shutting down. By morning, everyone in the colony knew about the crisis. They gathered in the main cave chamber, waiting for news. Fear showed on their faces. Even with all their technology, Mars was still trying to kill them. Kita spent hours studying the problem. He noticed something interesting about how the Martian dust behaved in their air systems. It wasn't just blocking the filters, it was changing them chemically. "We've been trying to fight against Mars," he said during the emergency meeting. "But what if that's our mistake? What if we need to work with it instead?" Hai-jin understood what her husband meant. She had learned a similar lesson with her plants. The dust changed our soil in the greenhouses. Once we adapted to it, the plants grew better than before. Keita explained his idea. Instead of trying to keep all the Martian dust out of their systems, they could create new filters that used the dust's chemical properties to help clean the air. "It's risky," Han Sol said. "We've never tested anything like this. If it doesn't work, we'll lose more time and oxygen." "We have 48 hours of oxygen left," Captain Sang-ho said. "How long will these changes take?" 24 hours to rebuild the filters, Han Sol calculated. Another 12 hours to install and test them. Captain Sang-ho looked at the worried faces around him. They had trusted Earth's technology to keep them alive. Now they had to trust themselves to find a new way. "Do it," he ordered. They worked without rest. Han Sol and his engineering team rebuilt the filter systems. Kita adjusted the chemical processes to work with the Martian environment. Everyone helped however they could, knowing their lives depended on this solution. As the oxygen levels dropped, people gathered in the main chamber to save air. Children played quiet games while their parents watched the time pass. Some wrote messages to their families on Earth, just in case. Finally, after 33 hours of work, they were ready to test the new system. The colony held its breath as Han Sol activated the controls. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then the air quality readings began to improve. The new filters weren't just working. They were working better than the original ones. Cheers filled the colony. They had done more than just survive a crisis. They had learned an important lesson. Survival on Mars meant learning to work with the planet, not against it. That night, Kita looked through the colony's window at the red Martian landscape. The dust that had almost killed them was now helping them live. Perhaps that was the key to making this harsh world their home. 3 months after the oxygen crisis, the Mars colony looked very different. Engineer Han-Sol Kim and architect Yuna Shin stood in their new testing chamber, watching their latest invention at work. The machine in front of them pulled Martian air through special filters. Instead of fighting against the red planet's dust, it used the dust to help clean the air. The system was twice as effective as their old Earth-designed equipment. Ready to test the new pressure settings? Han-Sol asked, adjusting the controls. Yuna nodded, making notes on her tablet. Their new habitat design used this filtered air system. Rather than trying to create Earth-like pressure everywhere, they now used different pressure levels for different areas. It saved power and worked better with Mars's natural atmosphere. In another part of the colony, Dr. Hai-Jin Lee walked through her underground greenhouse. The plants were growing better than anyone had expected. After the oxygen crisis, she had completely changed how they grew food. "The tomatoes are ready," she told her assistant, pointing to the red fruits growing in the specially treated Martian soil. The plants had adapted to the weaker gravity, growing shorter but producing more food. Hai-Jin remembered how they used to think Martian dust was their enemy. Now they knew better. The dust, when properly processed, made the soil richer than they had imagined possible. They were growing enough food to feed the entire colony, with extra to store for emergencies. Dr. Kita Park had made his own breakthroughs with terraforming. In his laboratory, he studied the results of their latest atmospheric processing tests. The numbers showed something remarkable. "We don't need to make Mars exactly like Earth," he explained to Captain Sang-ho during their weekly meeting. "We can create environments that work for humans while keeping Mars' unique characteristics." The captain nodded in agreement. After the oxygen crisis, everyone understood that copying Earth wasn't the answer. Success meant finding new solutions for their new world. Yuna's team had made perhaps the biggest change in their approach to building. Instead of fighting against Mars' harsh surface conditions, they had gone underground. The colony now spread through a network of natural caves and tunnels, each section carefully reinforced and pressurized. "The rock protects us from radiation better than any artificial shelter," Yuna explained to a group of visitors from the secondary landing team. "And the cave system helps us control temperature without using too much power." Han-Sol had adapted their power systems to work with Mars's environment too. Solar panels now had special covers that let them work during dust storms. They had even found a way to use the static electricity in the Martian dust to generate extra power. One evening, the colony leaders gathered to review their progress. The screens in the meeting room showed graphs and charts, all pointing to the same conclusion. Their new approaches were working better than anyone had expected. "6 months ago, we almost lost everything because we tried to force Earth solutions on Mars," Captain Sang-ho said. "Now we're thriving because we learned to think differently." Kaita looked around the room at his colleagues. They had come to Mars as Earth scientists and engineers. Now they were becoming something new, the first true Martian innovators. Their successes weren't just keeping them alive. They were creating a whole new way of human life. 5 years had passed since their first landing on Mars. Dr. Kita Park stood in the colony's medical center, looking through the observation window. Inside, Medical Officer Su Jin-yoon was examining a tiny baby girl, born just hours ago. She was the first human ever born on Mars. The baby's parents, 2 members of the engineering team, had met during the oxygen crisis. Now they had made history. Their daughter was the first true Martian, the beginning of a new chapter in human existence. Kite remembered his own daughter, Mayray, who was now leading the second wave of colonists to Mars. Their ship would arrive in just 3 weeks. The colony had grown strong enough to welcome new members. In his office, Captain Sang-ho reviewed the colony's progress reports. The numbers told an amazing story. What had started as a handful of caves was now a thriving underground city. They had stable food production, reliable oxygen systems, and enough power to support 300 people. The new landing site is ready, Yuna reported during a morning meeting. They had built a proper landing pad this time, with guidance systems that worked in dust storms. No more emergency landings needed. Hai-Jin's agricultural team had transformed several large caves into gardens. They grew not just food, but flowers and trees too. The sight of green plants against red Martian rock still amazed visitors. Earth plants are evolving to live here, Hai-Jin explained to the colony school children during their science lesson. In a few generations, we'll have plants that are truly Martian. Hansol had trained a new generation of engineers who understood Mars' unique challenges. They didn't waste time trying to make things work like they did on Earth. Instead, they found new solutions that worked better on Mars. We're not just surviving anymore, Hansol told his team. We're building a civilization that could last for thousands of years. That evening, the colony gathered for a celebration. They had two reasons to be happy: the birth of the first Martian baby and the upcoming arrival of new colonists. Among them was Min Seok, who had learned even more about the ancient life forms he had discovered years ago. Mars wasn't always a cold desert, he told the crowd. Once it was more like Earth. Maybe someday it will be again. Keita and Hai-Jin walked to their favorite viewing spot after the celebration. Through the reinforced window, they could see Earth shining like a bright blue star in the Martian sky. Did you ever imagine this? Hai-Jin asked, holding her husband's hand. That we'd not only survive here, but create a real home. Keita thought about everything they had accomplished. They had faced dust storms, equipment failures, and near disaster. But they had also made discoveries that changed human history. They had learned to build, grow food, and create oxygen from Mars' own resources. Most importantly, they had learned to think like Martians. Now, watching the first Martian child sleep peacefully in the medical center, they knew their greatest success wasn't in the technology they had created. It was in building a place where new generations could live and grow, where humanity could reach for even more distant stars. The red planet that had once seemed like their greatest challenge had become their greatest teacher. Mars had taught them that survival meant adaptation, that progress meant letting go of old ways, and that humanity's future lay in learning to call new worlds home.